Hello, my name is Geoffrey Payne. I'm a housing and urban development consultant based in the UK. And I want to talk to you today about improving urban land tenure and property rights. Now, clearly nobody is going to invest in improving their house with scarce resources unless they feel secure. So perception is as important as legal status in determining people's feeling of security. So what do we mean by land tenure and property rights? Well, there are many definitions, but the ones I prefer to use are that land tenure is the mode by which land is held or owned, or the set of relationships between people concerning land or the product on it. Property rights can be defined also as a recognized interest in an individual or a group concerning land or development on it. So rights may cover a wide range of activities or issues such as access, use, transfer, development, inheritance. Rights obviously also to increasing access to credit or to services. So rights therefore define quite a lot about a society, because the way a society allocates land rights also says a lot about the way that society allocates rights in other aspects of public life. Now, there are several key regimes of land tenure and property rights. Each one exists within a legal, institutional and procedural system, of which the main ones around the world are customary tenure regimes, statutory private tenure regimes, statutory public tenure regimes, and religious tenure regimes. Now, it's important to note that each of these has different characteristics, strengths and weaknesses. There is no perfect solution that fits all cases. Customary tenure is the oldest system in the world and is very common in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. It enjoys widespread popular support because it gives continuity, it gives good access and security, but it does struggle in cases where land is coming under increasing pressure from urbanization. The private statutory tenure regimes evolved in Europe and have the benefit of giving high levels of tenure security to all involved. They include private ownership, leasehold and rental, and do require a strong legal enforceability in order to be effective. And cost of access can also be very high. Statutory public tenure regimes are common in societies which recognize the primacy of the group or the community or the nation. Land is commonly held by the state or administered by the state on behalf of the people. Rights there can be very secure, but the conditions of tenure can be restrictive and supply in these conditions can be limited. The fourth tenure regime I'd like to talk about is religious tenure, of which is very, very common in Islamic societies. These give a wide range of communal and individual rights, and social allocation is also a very wide possibility. So tenure regimes in Islamic societies are very effective in giving security, but they do struggle in many cases to be efficient, especially when land is under intense competition. So in addition to all of these categories, these formal categories, there's a wide range of non-formal categories that exist throughout the world, especially in rapidly urbanizing countries. These include many terms which are often colloquial local terms, such as favela, bidonville, kachiabadi, getchukondu, and so on. But these terms actually hide or fail to explain a wide range of subcategories which are essential in understanding the nature of a land and housing market, and therefore the tenure security associated with each of them. They range widely from the very, very basic, such as squatting or living in the public streets on the side of the road, up to fully, virtually legal settlements. In other words, settlements where people have bought the land legally, they've developed it in conformity with the building regulations, but they've simply not gone through the procedures of registering the title with the authorities. So in between these two extremes is a wide range of subcategories which are less than formal, but nonetheless provide a degree of security. For example, somebody may occupy land without permission, but with some degree of conformity to building regulations. You may have tenants living in areas. You may have multi-occupancy. In some cases, you can have an absentee landowner who leases the land to a builder who builds rooms for rent, and the tenants of the rooms then rent beds in the rooms, and the tenants of the beds rent time in the beds. So of course you have a multi-layered level of security on a single property, and within a wide range of properties in different settlements, therefore, you can have a vast range of different levels of tenure security. So we're not looking at one level of legal or illegal or semi-legal. We're looking at a wide range of categories. So identifying the full range of all these formal and informal categories is essential in understanding the nature of the land and housing market, how people can move within it, and what role governments can play in improving tenure security. So how can we actually classify this vast range of legal, semi-legal and illegal developments in land and housing? Now I think this can be done actually quite simply. For example, the key thing to start off with is to identify objectively all the tenure categories and subcategories that exist in your city. If possible, if you can allocate the proportion of each of those, if data is available, then you can record those simply by putting in a list of the continuum, showing then, secondly, the estimated level of tenure security that each subcategory enjoys. Now that should be done in terms of the practical level of security, the perceived level of security, not necessarily the legal or de jure level of security. When you've done that, we can then list on the same sheet of paper the relative property rights associated with each of these categories. And that includes obviously the right to occupy, the right to use, the right to access services, the right to transfer, to sublet, and to gain access to formal credit. A wide range of rights that apply to each category. Indicating the various property rights can be then shown in terms of their availability to men and women, or both equally. Now we can indicate that quite simply by showing a backward slash, symbolically, if the right to a property or land only applies to men. We can show it as a forward slash, if the right applies only to women. And we can show it as a cross, if the right applies to men and women equally. Now, all this information can be illustrated, as I said, on a single page. So you could even elaborate it by showing that a right is conditional, by showing it as a color, as a bold or in italics. So a wide range of information, in other words, can be shown in a single page on the whole range of tenure categories and associated property rights with them in a given context. Now, this isn't just important in terms of academic understanding, because it performs a vital role in providing the basis for policy. For example, if the continuum shows that there is a relatively easy step in transiting from a very low level of tenure security to a high formal level of tenure security, then that suggests that it is relatively simple to move from one to the other. And of course, the costs of each level of tenure security will increase accordingly as you go to more formal tenure categories. So if the gradations in level of security are modest, that does suggest a relatively efficient way of operating in terms of land tenure and property rights. However, if there is a major disjunction between two levels of categories or three levels of categories, that suggests where policy interventions can be most effectively introduced. So how can tenure policy improve tenure security and property rights? We need to remember that tenure policy plays a key part in encouraging investment in housing, in improving access to formal credit, in improving the property tax base for local governments and central governments, and increasing the public influence over land and housing markets, as well as the equity and efficiency of those markets, and in meeting the SDG goals. Now, during recent decades, forms of land tenure that have been promoted globally are focusing really on property ownership, individual ownership, on the basis that these will provide the greatest level of tenure security, access to formal credit, investment and improved market activity. Many donor agencies and national governments have been promoting land titling as a means of achieving these objectives. This has worked relatively well in rural areas where demand and supply are imbalanced, but is less effective in urban areas where the demand is far greater than the supply and where the difference in price between land without formal title or tenure and that with formal tenure is dramatic. So of course what happens is that if titles are given in areas of informality, people with access to information, inside information, or with a lot of power are going to claim the advantages over those without it. So you will encourage increasing inequality and not necessarily improve the tenure security of those that get the titles, because it often leads to evictions and to market-driven displacement. Extensive international research has shown that ownership does increase tenure security, but not necessarily lead to increased access to formal credit. This is mainly because people with low incomes are unable to service the loan, and therefore the collateral that their property provides is not really relevant. It is also important to note that many people complete part of the process in order to get titles, but then fail to register the full process, rendering the titles of everybody less certain than is intended in law. Also, land titling has not led to the dynamic markets that many people advocating titling has claimed. So on balance, I think one can say that individual ownership is very appropriate for those in stable, reasonable employment with prospects for increased employment, and for them that is ideal. But it is not appropriate for the young who need mobility to follow career opportunities, or for the poor who cannot afford to service the loan, or necessarily for the old who need only short-term security. It has also been shown that high levels, national high levels of home ownership has actually led to higher levels of unemployment. And of course, many of the countries experiencing problems today economically have very high levels of home ownership. So what alternatives are there to improve the tenure security and property rights of people at the lower end of the tenure continuum? Experience suggests that there's a wide range of incremental, pragmatic, and intermediate systems which have been tried and tested throughout the world. These offer short, medium, and longer-term tenure, both on an individual and a communal basis to people around the world. Examples include the simple measure of improving accessibility. If you can improve links to the rest of the city, that itself improves security and encourages investment. Another opportunity, of course, is not just to improve accessibility, but also services. If you can show that services are provided, that in itself makes people feel more secure, and they will invest what they can over time. It may be slow, but it works. The next thing, of course, is to provide protection from forced evictions and relocations. There's a wide range of examples where this has happened in Brazil, South Africa, Cambodia, Uganda. And this has helped also on an incremental basis to improve tenure security. Collective tenure can also be highly effective in improving tenure security and property rights. There's a number of examples around the world which offer short, medium and long-term rights. And this includes an example of communal land tenure on private land, which is consistent with the disciplines of the market and enables people to live in areas which they'd never be able to afford to, and also gives an income to the landowners until they're ready to develop. Community land trusts and cooperatives are widely applied throughout the world and highly effective. Then there's a wide range of individual incremental options as well. One of the most basic and most effective is for people simply to increase their documentation as evidence of occupation. If you can show that you've paid your electricity bills, your other utility bills for a consistent period of time, that alone increases your tenure security. And then, of course, there's the right to the city, the right use rights that you have in Brazil. There's the temporary occupation licenses in Kenya. There's the anti-cretico system in Bolivia. There's a wide range of other examples, such as the tenure leases in India and the temporary occupation licenses and certificate of rights as in Botswana. Now, most of these examples are cost effective, they're very easy to administer, they're very popular, and they do not require any changes to the legal system. They do show that governments can then adapt to the realities that they face without changing their legal frameworks or their political structures. It's very, very simple. And it does suggest that the basic principles that tenure policy should follow is, first of all, to prevent forced evictions. Secondly, to identify what works locally and is accepted and build on it. 3, to increase social legitimacy, without which nothing is going to work. 4th, to accept that land ownership and property ownership is appropriate for many sections of the population, but certainly not all, including the young and the old and the poor. And that a wide range of tenure options is needed to meet the wide range of demand categories that exist throughout the world. So government should increase the range of options available and not favour one over another. Thank you very much.